publishing magazines, newspapers, books, and goring sacred cows. Now that he is retired, he decided to get that college education he missed the first time around. Last year, he graduated from the SFSU Creative Writing Program, magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree, and was accepted into the master's program at this same fine institution. In the course of his professional life, he's gotten mayors recalled and police chiefs fired, interviewed both of California's U.S. senators and many of its congressional representatives, as well as film stars, musicians, and authors. He's also been arrested for inciting a riot and for assault on a police officer, actually 5 of them, but the charges were dropped. And he's published original works by Allen Ginsberg, Garrison Keillor, Amy Wallace, June Jordan, and Kim Adancio. He's hoping that the next time his name is in the news, it's for his first novel, A Day and Tonight, a Hegelian murder mystery based in San Francisco. Please welcome Fred.
Do you want this? I can't write fiction. So I write mainly fictionalized accountings of life. So I'm going to start with something from my youth. Super Saver was one of the few cool, quiet places away from the burn of the hot desert sun. Located at the far end of the only mall within miles, housed in front of the store near the checkout cashiers, 3 wire carousels full of paperbacks. Every day after school, beginning in the 4th grade, he promptly fled the risks and heat of the schoolyard for this sanctuary and its repository of otherworldliness, of lives unlike his own. In a place of retail opportunity, the space where merchant meant desire, he had no money. That didn't mean he couldn't read. So he whiled away the hours reorganizing the carousels, sorting the far-flung progeny of Jacqueline Suzanne into carefully ordered collections. Valley of the Dolls in one rack, The Love Machine in another, Once Is Not Enough in the third. Mary McCarthy's The Group filled several slots, while there were so few copies of Memories of a Catholic Girl, he wasn't sure the author was the same. Despite such libertine tastes, despite that his father was a teacher, he had only been reading for 2 years, functionally illiterate when he entered the 2nd grade. A librarian opened his eyes to this world, spending part of each day for more than a year, teaching him how to read. Her offerings had been of a more elementary material, the authorized juvenile biographies of soldiers and sailors and presidents, while other youngsters his age eagerly flipped the colorful pages of Superman comic books under the constant watchful eye of the cashiers or store manager. No one paid any attention to the odd child, sorting stacks of paperbacks, reading bits and pieces from novels meant to serve the desires of stifled suburban housewives, who otherwise had 2.3 children and washing and ironing to fill their days. Inside pages of fine black and white print, the boy discovered passionate women, voluptuously endowed, and Mandingo, the epitome of savage masculinity, flexing his glistening, powerful, well-muscled body as the plantation master's wife willingly surrendered to her disturbing appetites. But Mandingo was black and angry and violent, with a lurid sexuality, more metaphor than precise description. The boy was white, skinny, and scared, more confusion than magnetism. More to his purpose was the group, with its precise detail. He reached for the Y of her crotch. This thrilled him with its promise of more and more and more, but of more what? He wasn't sure. Having touched the strange, bare, down there flesh of the girl next door, and she his, he couldn't say what the allure was. What goes where, how, or even why wasn't clear. The boy had more questions than knowledge. He couldn't grok Valentine Michael Smith's erotics either, with its strictly out of this world mashing together of mothers and sisters and grandfathers, all mixed up and crazy. The boy didn't know what to make of it all, but dutifully stacked and organized and restacked these books upon books in careful sequence, colorful cover to cover, ravished women pressed up against ravishing men, lust and hunger and fear, merged into 350 pages of passion, 10 copies deep. What was such an orgy to a boy of 10 who didn't have a buck and a quarter to set these heroes and heroines free from their wire racks? His passion was the hours he spent reading, watching out for the cashiers and store manager so that they never saw him slipping surreptitiously 1, 2, 3, even 4 paperbacks into his pants at a time, several times a week. Every day, eventually, it was time to go back to the house where everyone screamed and the boy would carefully stand, his shirt draped over the large bulge in front of his trousers, as he willed himself invisible and calmly walked out of the store with his newfound friends pressed tightly to his groin. Spring was everywhere, and everywhere was green again, with magnificent blossoms and busy bees and birds chirping, and pretty young women out in their front yards gardening for pleasure, wearing as little as was decently possible on this glorious sunny day in another of Palo Alto's upper-middle-class neighborhoods, where the young mommies didn't have to work to keep their homes lovely and clean, packed full of treasures. A part of him was disappointed. Nothing had changed since he had moved out. No boarded up broken windows, no straggly weeds marring the perfect manicured lawns, no broken down cars listing sadly in the driveway. Clearly, everyone everywhere there was getting along quite well without him. Perhaps no one even noticed he was gone. Walking up to the house where he once lived, he took a certain pride in the sturdy white picket fence which surrounded the yard his very young daughter played in. He built that and made sure the gate was strong and secure, keeping her safe from the horrors found too easily out in the world, keeping her in, the bad people out. The woman who opened the door was a stranger. He had heard his ex had moved a young woman in to help her out now that he no longer lived there. His ex had always been too busy with her own life to look after their young child full time. The woman said her name was Sheila and walked out of the room. Looking around as he waited for this stranger to get his daughter, he noticed how clean everything was, how the furniture was neat and dusted, very carefully arranged. It must be her doing, this stranger, as his ex had always been kind of a slob, notorious for her indifference to domestic niceties. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe his daughter's mother was different now that he was out of the picture. And there were paintings on the wall he'd never seen before. Strange images of wet flowers lathered up with wild, brushing, splashing strokes in unnaturally vibrant colors. The overall effect was pleasant, but not at all quiet. The images seemed to dominate the room rather than accent it. "I've got her all packed up," Sheila said as he walked into the room, clutching the 2-year-old's hand tightly. The little girl looked nervous as this woman handed him a small suitcase. This too was different. Normally, the child had just been handed off to him without anything but the clothes she wore. He always assumed it was meant to be a sort of punishment. His ex's attitude was that if he needed anything, he should just buy it. Whatever he purchased went back when his daughter did, but it was never seen again. Normally, his daughter ran to him and jumped up to be held. Not this time. This time, the child looked unsure. The stranger stared at him hard and seemed reluctant to let go. "I've heard about you," she said after a long pause. "You're not a good man. I'm not sure I should let you take her. She's my good little girl." Or novels too. There's no time for that here. I try to talk to her. This is called the diabolic language of ravens, or brujo. I try to talk to her, though we will never really speak the same language. Her eyes are not yellow, though in my mind's eye they seem that color. They are shiny, like rubies, if rubies were black. Her coat is as shimmery shiny as her eyes, and she wears it tight around her shoulders, with just a bit of hard black ruffle at the neck. She keeps her distance. I am a curiosity and from time to time a generous patron, but she's too worldly to trust me within arm's reach. She fears reasonably I might reach out and take hold of her, trap her, resist her, restrict her. I might, but not for long, for I love her. I do not know why I yearn to hold and caress she who is so alien, so unlike me. My wife refers to her as your familiar. She might say, Your familiar is outside calling for you, or I saw your familiar today. I think she wanted something to eat. I like the way your familiar sounds, like family. I would be proud to call her a member of my family, but of course, unlike my wife, my familiar and I are deeply estranged, divided by lines impossible to cross. That said, my wife is generous. She accepts my peculiarities, my idiosyncrasies, my strange passions, my familiar. Perhaps this is why I always must shout out hello wherever my familiar and I meet. But I am rarely successful in bridging the great divide between us. Only once was I able to call her to my side. It was a sunny day in South Berkeley, and I was sitting on the grass reading when her shadow darkened my page. She was sweeping past high above. As I have so often, I cawed at the enchanting and mysterious blackbird in the sky. And as she frequently does, she cawed back. We responded back and forth as she wheeled around above me until finally she landed on a telephone wire nearby but far out of reach. Her head tilted from side to side inquisitively, as though she might catch a glimpse of my true self, if only she cocked her head just right. Children are often like that, tilting from left to right and back again, trying to see if there's a perfect way to see someone. When she fluttered down to land on a fence nearby, I was surprised. That rarely happens, only this one time. She was still far out of reach, but clearly wanted a closer look at the strange, colorless, featherless creature who tried so hard to speak her unspeakable language. Bit by bit, the bird came closer and closer, and eventually flew to the ground nearby. In exchange for her company, I offered bits of the sandwich I'd been eating. I called out, she responded. I threw a piece of bread. She hopped over to snatch it. Over a period of time, perhaps an hour, we got closer and closer until at last she hopped onto my leg where I was seated on the ground and peered at me quizzically while I fed her. At the time, in the mid to late 1970s, I lived across the street from Isabel Allende's brother, Francisco, and a woman I understood to be their sister. Isabel Allende is, of course, as you know, the noted author who uses magic realism in her stories. The Allendes were quiet people who kept to themselves, and the neighbors didn't intrude on the family, as we all knew how they had suffered terribly at the hands of the Chilean government. Ironically, more than 10 years later, I employed Amparo del Rio, the daughter of General Pinochet's personal doctor. She viewed the situation very differently. I recalled seeing the Andes staring discreetly out their window at this odd spectacle of a white man and a black bird conversing, testing, and slowly coming to greet each other. Where before the Andes had been distant, now they were completely invisible. For perhaps a year I rarely saw them. But I never realized they were going out of their way to avoid me at all costs. Only after we were reintroduced, under safer social circumstances, did they explain to me that they had deliberately avoided any contact with the brujo, the peculiar magician who spoke the diabolic language of the ravens. It's called The Ride to Hell. Maybe she said Bobby, that was his name. Maybe she just barked or growled something painful and primal. Whatever it was, it made him turn around and look right at her. This was not an entirely safe decision, as they were traveling at 60 miles an hour on a crowded freeway between Valley Medical Center and Pioneer Hospital at dusk on an early winter night. He didn't get an opportunity to make out what she said. She was already out the door. Slamming on the brakes in the middle of bumper-to-bumper traffic, Bobby wrenched the steering wheel of the 1967 21-window Volkswagen van with a very desirable blue and white two-tone paint job hard to the right with his left hand. The van skittered and hopped, lurching out of control across traffic, pointed toward the edge of the freeway. He didn't have the emotional or intellectual space to respond to the squealing tires and angry honking, to the frightened drivers screaming obscenities as cars on both sides swerved away from the van, with the young woman partially inside, partially outside, her door swinging as wildly as her arms. With his right hand, Bobby stabbed out and caught hold of some clothes and some flesh. She didn't feel any pain. No one could say how they managed to come to a stop in the gravel on the side of the road. Unlike the stereotype of a woman so lovely, she was strong, very strong. The year previous, she'd been West Coast women's surfing champion. That was before her abortion. That was before she dumped her fiancé. That was before she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. That was before her first psychotic episode, the one that put her in Valley Med. With a hard yank, she wrestled free of his grip and ran headlong into the rush hour traffic. He followed her from his side of the vehicle. They had been happy in love. It wasn't perfect. There had been some good times and there had been some rough spots. The time she told him in the middle of a party that she wasn't monogamous anymore. She was going home with someone else. There's nothing you can do about it, she said. Go on, go away. Find someone else. He left in tears, but after a few days, they worked it out in a fashion. She seemed happy. They were pretty together. Then she went home to visit her parents for a visit. Unexpectedly, she called him from the airport. You need to pick me up, she said. I need you now. On the ride back, she was glad to see him. She said she wanted to make love as soon as they got home. In the middle of making love, she jumped up and ran naked in the night. He was trying to kill me, she screamed. She was fast as well as strong, and the dark night completely consumed her. Stanford Hospital. That's where they take you if you're wandering around Palo Alto without clothes in the middle of the night. Then Valley Med, if they don't think you have insurance. A county hospital, Valley Med, has to take all the crazies. A week later, when her parents found out, they wanted her transferred to Pioneer. It was private, discreet, expensive. Her parents wanted the very best for baby. She didn't have a chance, nor did he. 19 and naive, he hadn't given any thought to the possibility she would have another breakdown on the ride from one hospital to the next. The oddest thing, when a young woman pursued by a young man runs directly onto the freeway into rush hour traffic, everyone expects drivers to hit the brakes. And the noise dozens of cars make slamming on their brakes is nearly symphonic, some wild, excessive, postmodern symphony of brass and wind instruments squealing, with wild, wide-open eyes behind every window. What you don't expect is the spasmodic reflex of locking the door and punching gas as soon as you, the driver, have avoided squishing one or both of them on the front bumper of your vehicle. She ran further into traffic with every locked door, and the sound of squealing tires and honking horns faded away into the mundane and predictable background, easily ignored. At last, a large old guy in a broken-down Impala, a greasy-haired fellow of questionable intention, grinned and leered at her and then at him, reaching over to unlock his passenger side door. She leapt into the car. He slammed on the gas. The young man remained standing in the middle of the freeway, in the middle of rush hour traffic, watching her disappear once more into the night. This is called Shitty City. Hey buddy, want to buy some crack? It wasn't really a question, more of a demand, but I ignored this as I stepped briskly around the craggy old burnout with his red-rimmed eyes and long, filthy, straggling hair. His eyes tracked me carefully, belaying his somnolent, intoxicated appearance. He wasn't dangerous if I wasn't vulnerable. As I wasn't vulnerable, he shifted slightly on his feet, making it possible to step around him without having to push him out of the way. This part of the city is not what most folks think about when they envision a good time in San Francisco. Most folks think fancy painted Victorian houses or trendy retail shops operated by stylish men. The Tenderloin is not such a place. Here, the disposed litter of the sidewalks looking for opportunities for another meal, another fix, another night's rent in the SROs nearby. Years ago, walking through this neighborhood, I stopped and examined the Xerox paper taped to the window of the Tenderloin Resource Center. It was the inside of a van pictured with two bundled up objects. The bundled up objects were a teenage boy, 11 or 12, who had been kidnapped a year previously while out hunting with his father in the Midwest. Trussed up beside him was a woman in her 20s who disappeared from Washington State within the last few months. Someone had found a Polaroid of these two missing persons, still alive, inside what authorities had identified as a late model white Dodge cargo van. The poster encouraged encouraged anyone with any information to call the police. That's the Tenderloin. For at least the last 50 years, the loin has been where folks went if they wanted to score dough, fuck strangers for money, watch folks do things to themselves and each other that most people can't even imagine. It's the kind of place where someone might have information on that white man. Thank you.